Oh, you got it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wooten's PTSA March meeting. We're so glad that you're joining us here tonight. We have a full agenda, and we're very pleased to have our guests from Potomac Oak Tutoring here to present the college readiness seminar. So we'll be getting to that shortly. But before we do, we want to just provide some PTSA updates. So we'll go to the next slide. First of all, we have only 2 more meetings left in our school year, which is really hard to believe. So we wanted to share our 2 upcoming meetings in April and May. In April, we're very pleased that Jody Glau and Andrea Malkin-Brenner will be joining us to talk about beginning to build critical adulting in high school. And basically that presentation is about preparing your kids for the transition to eventually be independent adults in college. So, it's a great presentation. They wrote a book. They have a lot of very valuable information to share. So we're looking forward to having them at our April meeting. That's April 19th at 7 p.m. And then for our May meeting, we are pleased to have Amy Smith join us from Power Hour Editing. And she's going to talk about how to find and communicate your wow factor in college essays and activity lists. So it's a really important part of the college applications is the college essays and the activity list. And her presentation is excellent and will be good it'll be good timing as our seniors, or actually our juniors, our rising seniors are going to be heading into the summer working on applications and writing essays and preparing their activity list. So we think the timing will be perfect for that. We hope you can join us on May 17th at 7 p.m. And it's really good for parents of other ages as well, because it gives you some insight into the process and what is involved in preparing for college. We can move on to the next slide. So we are very pleased. We're going to be offering, we're partnering with Wooten to offer this rising 9th grade information session. It's going to be on April 21st at 7 p.m. For rising 9th graders. Principal Bolden's staff will be there to answer questions. We will record it for those that cannot attend, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel where we post all of our archived videos. And you can find more details on the Wooten PTSA website. You can see the address there. And if you have a rising 9th grader, we hope that you can join us. And we'll move on to the next slide. So we are planning a college admissions panel with college reps. We had it last year in April, and it was really well attended. We received some really great information. And as you know, there's been lots of changes over the past couple of years in the college admissions process due to COVID. And so, we think it's a very valuable opportunity to hear directly from college representatives and to answer, and they're going to be here to answer all your questions. So we're working on that. We'll provide a date as soon as we have that finalized. We'll be posting it on our website and our newsletter. You'll hear it in the Wooten updates that Principal Bolden sends out as well. And you can check out our last year's panel on the YouTube channel. It is excellent and very informative, even for you to listen to it watch it a year later. We'll move on to the next slide. So May is when we hold our elections for PTSA. It's only 2 months away. We have formed our nominating committee, and that is myself, Sab, Shad, and Nikki. And so we have a number of open positions. We really do hope that you consider participating and being involved in PTSA. Attending the meetings is great, but we really could use volunteer help. There's so much to do, and there's so much that volunteers bring to the Wooten community, and we hear from Principal Bolden team all the time the value that PTSA brings, and that can't be done without great people to volunteer and help out and give a little bit of their time. So that being said, we have a number of our executive board positions are up. These are all 2-year positions. And you can for those that are interested, you can run again, and you can actually have two terms two two-year terms, up to two two-year terms. But so the first and second vice presidents have, the first vice president fulfilled the first term and is not going to be running again. So that position is open. Our second vice president ended up having to resign from the position due to other things that were going on. And then, so that position is open. We have a recording secretary position and our treasurer position. So we have four positions open, and please consider those. Now, these are executive board positions. Executive board positions require the body to vote and elect those candidates for those positions. We generally, we want to have at least one candidate, and usually we do have one. Sometimes we have two, but that is an election. We have other openings on the PTSA board, and these are really critical positions as well. We have the membership and directory co-chair, the website co-coordinator, the Latino Parent Student Network, blocking my liaison, the Asian Parent Student Network liaison, and the graduation bus coordinator, which is a really important role. That coordinator only serves for a short period to plan the buses that will be taking parents to DAR Constitution Hall and managing all the volunteers that help to coordinate on the day of. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to give you a little bit more insight into some of our positions.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to take a minute and talk about the membership and directory co-chair and website co-coordinator. Those aren't really positions that we have right now. I do those positions by myself, along with being the treasurer. And so as I start to think about my daughter graduating in 3 years from now, just wanting to see if maybe there was anybody who's interested in learning how to do those. So I'll still be around next year, still doing those. But if anybody is interested in seeing what it's about, not kind of being on their own, kind of a safe way to see, like, do I like this maybe for the next year by myself or in the future, I'd be happy to have the help. But again, those are two positions that you would definitely not be doing by yourself. I'll be here to help. And also back to Brian's point about the graduation bus coordinator, I have helped with that in the past. And so really, I would be the one handling like payments, the website, all of that kind of thing. What we really, really just need is that person who can be there the day of graduation, who has to be there early in the morning, who has to, hand out the bracelets and show people where to go and all of that. So it's really just mostly a one-day job. So it's not a huge commitment. But again, if you're interested in any of these positions, you can email any of the three of us. All of our contact information is on the Wooten website, as well as descriptions for all of these roles. That is also on the Wooten website. So we're happy to help, and please let us know if you want to discuss any of the positions. And so with that, I'm going to move on and do a quick update on membership. We've just, in the past few months, we finally eclipsed our FY19-20 numbers. We were a little under, but we have been hoping to exceed those, and we now have. So we're on track for membership. We're a little lower than maybe we had budgeted, but I'm happy that we've exceeded those numbers, and hopefully next year, when we can hopefully be in person for back to school night, our numbers will be back to where we want them to be. And then as far as a quick treasurer's update, like I said, receipts are down just a little bit, but our expenses are down, though I will say a lot of our expenses come at the end of the year when we help out with post-prom, and there's more staff appreciation events and things like that. So that number definitely is going to go up before the end of the year, but it should not exceed our budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Bolden. Before she starts, I just wanted to point out on here that we have canceled this Friday's coffee chat just due to a conflict. But we'll be back next month with the coffee chat. But I would also encourage you, if you had a burning question that you wanted to hold for this Friday, that you could also put it in the chat now, and I'm sure Ms. Bolden would be happy to address that. So I am going to turn it over to her.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki. Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here, and I really appreciate just having a few minutes before we get to the main event just to speak with you. Yes, I'm sorry I have to cancel this Friday's coffee chat. We are in the middle of our spring project, and our assembly for the spring project is on Friday. And I also have a principals meeting that I couldn't get out of. So I also have to attend both of those things. So there are just a few conflicts for Friday, but I look forward to getting back on track next month. And as Nikki said, if you have a burning question, please put it in the chat and I'll do my best to answer it before I wrap up. Just some events and upcoming things that we would like for you to know about. As Brian said, we really work in partnership together, the PTSA and the school, and many of the events are co-led and co-planned and executed. And so it has been a really great year, because I don't know how the PTSA pulls off the amount of support that they give the school, but you all do, and I'm so very appreciative. We couldn't do it without this partnership. And at the same time, coming back after the interruptions and disruptions that we've had, we would love to have more volunteerism in the PTSA, in all of our service organizations, quite frankly, but PTSA boosters and patrons. But particularly tonight, I'd love to speak about PTSA. There are so many wonderful opportunities to volunteer. And as you heard, there are times where it's a one-day kind of deal, and then there are others that may require a little bit more commitment. But I promise you, we have fun. We do great programming for our students and staff. And I invite you to, if you're thinking about it, truly, I feel like I'm very fortunate to work with a great group of people. And I know that as we start to rebuild our volunteer component of our school, I really would hope that you would consider volunteering for the PTSA and helping out in some of these endeavors. So with that, I just want to give a few updates and where we're headed for spring semester. I cannot believe that very soon we'll be finished with the third marking period. And we are moving closer and closer to really having putting a bow on this really challenging but yet successful year. What I love most about the spring is that we get to see our kiddos in action and seeing the fruits of all their labors over the course of the year in really interesting and great ways. As I mentioned, this week is our spring project. Our SGA has taken on the task of presenting every 50 minutes. They've updated this program, and it's about distracted driving and the dangers of distracted driving, being a passenger, all of the ways that our students can be protected, and what they can do to save a life, and very much so could save their own lives. And so we have quite a few events planned throughout this week, with a simulation that is happening of a car crash on Thursday and an assembly on Friday. And so I've sent some communications home so you have a good sense of what's happening. As you know, as our students are coming back and they're very excited to celebrate and to socialize, we want them to be safe. We want them to be responsible. And I'm so very glad that the SGA has taken upon themselves to present this project over the course of this week, and really great information as a result. We are also gearing up this month, later this month and early next month, for our spring musical, The Little Mermaid. It is going to be a great production. If you have not already done so, please go to our website and get tickets. We would love, love, love for you to come out and bring your younger ones to our events. Our theater department is, again, working hard, and we want to show them after the year of coming back that we support them. So it'll be a great time and it'll be a great evening. So I encourage you to come out for that. We start spring sports this week with Meet the Coaches Night on Thursday, and excited that we're rounding out this year of sporting events with our spring sports. And I look forward to seeing folks on Thursday for that. Next week, our juniors are taking the SAT on March 23rd. We will have a delayed opening that day, and we will post the schedule so everyone is aware of it. But our juniors will be taking the SAT in the morning on Wednesday, March 23rd. We also have junior banquet on March 26th. We're finalizing some of the details, excuse me, of the junior banquet. And on that day, our acatonics are going to New Jersey They are in the semifinals for a cappella competition. So again, lots going on there. And also on another note of programming that we do in the spring, our counseling department later in April will be presenting signs of suicide to all of our students and to do some suicide awareness and prevention. Those will be structured lessons through their math classes. And so again, we'll be sending home some more information regarding that endeavor. For our senior parents, we're full steam ahead with senior events. Mr. Momana will be sending out an email either tomorrow or on Thursday with some updates regarding senior meetings, which will start on March 25th. We're asking that all senior parents attend one of 3 meetings. We have 3 meetings, March 25th, March 29th, and April 6th. 2 are in person, 1 is on Zoom, and it is all the information you need to know about graduation, which is June 14th. We also are we're also full steam ahead with picnic and prom, and we are so very excited to celebrate our seniors this semester as they get ready to graduate. We took some of the students down to DAR Constitution Hall. It is absolutely beautiful, lots of remodeling that happened during the closure, and the kiddos were very excited about graduation and getting prepared for that. And so with that, I just want to say once again, thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and just a very special thanks to our special guests who will be presenting in just a few minutes. And I really appreciate all that PTSA has done and continues to do on behalf of our students and staff. I hope you have a great night.
Thank you for those updates and kind words about the PTSA. All right, well, we're ready now for our presentation from Potomac Oak Tutoring. So I would like to present to you Pavel, who is an alum of Wooten. We're so proud to have him here to, he's one of the co-owners of Potomac Oak Tutoring. They offer SAT and ACT practice tests at Wooten and mock tests. And they're very supportive of Wooten High School. So I'm going to turn it over to Pavel, and then he will introduce the speakers for this evening.
Yes, thank you so much. And a big thank you to everybody for inviting us, Brian, Nikki, Saab, and everybody else who were instrumental in allowing us to do this presentation. As Brian mentioned, I am an alumni of Wooten, and so have all the founders actually of our company. We all went to Wooten, granted not in the same year, but at different times. So it is near to our heart, and this is something that I genuinely enjoy doing, and very grateful for having the opportunity to do. I will like to introduce the 2 college consultants who know a lot more about college consulting than I ever will. Angelica and Krista. Angelica has just a little bit of a background about the 2. Angelica graduated from Columbia University with a double major in political science and creative writing. She has studied at Oxford, I believe, and Angelica, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe she's currently at Cambridge, and she is again pursuing her studies there. She's worked as an editor and a ghostwriter for a lot of different publications, and she's got years of experience helping students craft powerful personal narratives and develop their voices, capture their voices, and navigate the admissions process. We're also very fortunate to have Krista. She has been guiding students from both public and charter and independent schools through the admissions process for over 10 years now. She's a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she is also a member of the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. She has also worked in admissions for MIT and has helped review applications in that capacity as well. Again, I will defer to them on all questions related to college consulting. And thank you so much. I will now hand over the presentation to them.
Thanks, Pavel. Let me start sharing screen. Give me one moment.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. And, we just want to reiterate that we're so excited to be here. We love working with Wooten students. And just thank you for spending a little bit of your Tuesday evening with us.
Okay, here we go. Okay. And let me just get this into our slideshow. Okay, Angelica, take it away.
Looking forward to it. As I said, we're very excited to be here. This is basically a college planning and admissions kind of 101 presentation. We are here, as Pavel mentioned, with Potomac Oak Tutoring, and we're here to kind of walk you through whether or not you're an underclassmen student or parent of an underclassmen student or an upperclassmen student or parent of one. We hope to kind of walk you through, just give you a little bit of information about the college admissions process. In terms of our agenda tonight, just so you know, we will be sending out a recording at the end of our presentation. So don't worry, if you miss something, there's going to be a recording sent out. And then we're going to leave time at the end to answer your questions as well. Just a heads up that, we won't be able to kind of answer student specific questions, but we do hope to, answer what we can. And then our presentation is going to be divided into 3 parts. Part 1 will be kind of a general exploration of what admissions officers look for. Part 2, we're going to focus on our 8th to 10th graders and give you some information just about, what parents of underclassmen, should know, just looking ahead. And then part 3, we're going to shift our focus to 11th and 12th graders and what parents of 11th and 12th graders should know about the current state of admissions. So Pavel, we're lucky enough that he introduced us. I'm very happy to be here with my wonderful colleague, Krista. As Pavel mentioned, each of us kind of come with our own unique experiences. It's been great working with Krista because she has such an in-depth background, as an admissions officer. And I know, from my perspective, I just love helping students tell their stories. I think obviously, securing admission is a really, really important part of this process, but we do hope that the experience, albeit stressful, is an enriching one and that it helps students kind of hone skills related to writing and their own rhetorical abilities that will transfer to their higher education and any kind of professional track that they end up pursuing after that. So one thing that I do want to start off by talking about is admissions criteria. These are, things that we probably get asked about the most. What is a successful application and how are colleges actually evaluating students? One of the things that we get asked about a lot, kind of out of the gate, is about academics. Of course, a student's transcript is exceptionally important, if not the most important part of the application, because it's what your student is doing every day for the entirety of their high school career. One thing that we do want to kind of iterate is that regarding academic criteria and regarding transcripts, with kind of competitive admissions, basically academics, like your GPA and that kind of thing, they kind of determine whether or not a student will kind of receive an automatic no. So there's no kind of GPA that you can secure or test that you can secure that will guarantee you admissions into a school, but it can help with avoiding that automatic no. In terms of the question that we get a lot is whether or not GPA or weighted GPA kind of are more important. And regarding this, it really is dependent on each student. That is going to be one thing that Krista and I kind of iterate consistently throughout this presentation. I know that we're both really, really passionate about not applying kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to students, because every student and every family is so different. One thing to keep in mind with GPA or weighted GPA is that it really differs, community to community, region to region. There are a lot of places in the States where, weighted GPA doesn't exist. So this is really, important in the context of, of Wooten and of your child's school. One thing to keep in mind with GPA or weighted GPA is that, it's impossible to have a very high, an exceptionally high weighted GPA and not have a high GPA, but the inverse is not true. So you could have a very high GPA, but have a low weighted GPA. The weighted GPA just kind of gives us more information and tells us whether or not a student has been able to excel, in higher level courses. Another kind of line of questioning that we interrogate quite a bit is, helping students determine honors versus AP courses, how many APs they should take. All of this is, of course, really, really important, but again, really is dependent on kind of the needs and the trajectory of each student. For instance, with certain STEM focused students, we might encourage them to take more APs. And again, there's kind of a little bit of a time calculus that's dependent on each student. Maybe we don't want to be in a situation where a student is taking, all APs, but is getting C's and D's in those classes. So this is something that we really interrogate with each student, each family, setting realistic goals and making sure that we're putting our students, in the position to have the most high performing transcript that they can. In terms of trends affecting admissions, I do think that it's important to mention, of course, we're in Montgomery County, that weighted GPA trends is that they are on the rise. So that is something to be cognizant of. It is increasingly competitive kind of in this area. And that's something that we're always, kind of number crunching and problem solving for, and helping students really differentiate themselves and differentiate their academic trajectories. Finally, kind of in this category, a common question that we get is, should a student take the ACT or the SAT? Again, this is really dependent on the student. It kind of, everyone learns differently. Certain students tend to perform better on the ACT, others tend to perform higher on the SAT, and that's something that we help students determine. And regarding when a student should take standardized testing, we strongly encourage all students to, take at least one by the end of junior spring. I think a lot of the time, students and families, especially if they haven't been through the process before, can kind of underestimate how intensive the writing process is. I see Krista nodding, and I'm sure she's in agreement with that too. So as early as we can get testing done, the better. In terms of other components of the application that are really, really important, that go beyond, just GPA or testing, one thing that we're seeing in this pandemic and, fingers crossed post-pandemic landscape is that extracurriculars are, increasingly important in allowing students to differentiate themselves. So these what kind of falls under the umbrella of extracurriculars would be school clubs, outside organizations, internships, work experience, and volunteer service engagement. In terms of how we evaluate that and how students should balance their extracurriculars, that is something that we really determine on a student by student basis. We like to organize and kind of break down extracurriculars into 3 categories, being, tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1. And that's something that we get into more in depth with the students that we work with directly. One thing that you can kind of keep in mind, when planning ahead or, figuring out kind of how to showcase your extracurriculars and which ones might be most meaningful to talk about on your college applications, thinking about leadership. So, have you gone beyond just participating, but really taken on a role in which you're positively shaping, the community of the club that you're engaged with, your local community, your regional community? Are you actually shaping kind of the legacy of the group that you're involved in. Longevity and depth of involvement, I think these two things go hand in hand. So it's not kind of, rather than maybe trying 20 different extracurriculars and participating for, a few months at a time, showing that you have committed to something and that you've really engaged in an intensive way is definitely something that admissions rewards. And then passion too. I can't say enough when a student is writing about an extracurricular that they're passionate about, that really shines through. And more than anything, we hope that talking about this is an invitation to explore, what you might and what your student might be most passionate about. And then one thing that we really do emphasize in our admissions consulting process is figuring out how these extracurricular interests align with the narrative of your whole application. Again, this kind of feeds into the storytelling aspect of the application process. Additional factors that contribute to how a candidate is evaluated. Letters of recommendation, which I'm sure is something that a lot of parents are thinking about. These can come from teachers, counselors, employers, coaches, alumni potentially. As educators, I think one thing that we can encourage, is asking recommenders early, giving them the time to provide the best recommendation possible. And then also providing them details. So, helping them help you, providing an in-depth, any details that they that could be advantageous to them. So that's also something that we kind of guide students through. One thing to keep in mind, even for younger students, if there are teachers that you're thinking that might write a recommendation, definitely go to extra help with that teacher, try to build a personal relationship. The earlier that you start doing that, the better. And also I'm sure, it will enrich, your learning environment and your high school experience as well. For these recommendations, we do recommend that students ask junior year teachers in their core subjects. Obviously it's better if there's a teacher that you've had for multiple years that extends into junior year, but it really is important that this teacher is from your junior year, because they can most readily speak to kind of your most recent abilities. And then these recommendations should also come from one humanities and one STEM oriented teacher. As I'm sure Krista can attest to, at MIT even, they request that you submit at least one humanities recommendation. So regardless of what you're specializing in, it's important to show that you've had positive academic experiences across the academic spectrum. And then other factors that the student might be evaluated on would be athletic status. When it comes to athletics, unless a student is being recruited, athletic involvement does not have a massive impact on their candidacy or chances of admission. That's just something to kind of keep in mind when planning ahead. Exceptional music abilities or other talents could definitely help. Interviews are very, very, very important. One statistic that we kind of like to give and emphasize is that, at MIT, for example, if a student is offered an interview and they don't accept it, their chance of admission declines to less than 1%. We understand that, not all students might consider themselves, the interviewing type, but that is something that can be coached and that we do assist with. Legacy is something that's weighed differently at different schools. Again, that's something that we would counsel on in an individual basis. And then residency impacts candidacy as well. We think of school systems like the University of California. California residents would have priority. Right now we've had a little bit of time to kind of synthesize some of the takeaways from the pandemic and its impact on admissions. What we told our seniors at the beginning of the pandemic really did kind of turn out to hold true. At that point, we said test optional isn't a cause for celebration. A lot of students were really excited. They're like, I don't have to do any testing. But if anything, this actually just kind of contributed to a lot more students submitting applications. This made like academics and grades even more important, extracurriculars more important, essays more important, and letters of recommendation more important. Interviews as well also became increasingly significant and determinant. In terms of like campus visits, this also changed, the way in which students toured and explored different campuses. I think the good thing about it is that a lot of students, who might have been geographically limited before have access to tour a campus online. So I think that's positive. We also saw that certain majors and programs, became increasingly saturated. This is something that, we advise on kind of an individual school basis. One thing that is tricky about campus visits, being different is that it's a little bit more challenging to kind of force students to show demonstrated interest. That's something that Krista is going to go over a little bit later in our presentation. After kind of, seeing our outcomes, one thing that we're emphasizing to students and families is that it can be really advantageous to apply early decision. With these binding agreements, your chances of admission go up significantly. So that's something that we would urge you to consider seriously if that is an option. And also, consider applying to more colleges than you normally would because the number of applicants has kind of risen across the board. Another thing would just be that making sure that your safeties are your real safeties. So a lot of schools, because the number of applicants has increased so significantly, it's made it very hard for schools to basically predict their yield. And what we mean by that, the yield is out of the number of acceptances that a school offers, what is the percentage that accept the acceptance? So because colleges have been having a harder time anticipating what that yield, would be, they do something that we call yield protecting, where they might either like defer or waitlist or even potentially reject a candidate who might be qualified, but whom they don't think would actually attend. So yeah, kind of the big takeaways, we have a lot of yellow highlighter here, is that it's been more difficult for everybody. Naviance is also a tool, even though it's great. Chris is going to go over kind of how we use that a little bit later on in the presentation, but it is less reliable because there's kind of been a bit of a paradigm shift in the last couple of years in admissions. Applicant pools are likely to be much bigger, and then many more deferrals due to wild yields, as I mentioned. And when it comes to early decision, we're encouraging students to consider it seriously. As you see, like, I think in 2021, early decision applications rose by 22% at Brown, 23% at UPenn, 29% at Dartmouth, and even close to 50% at Columbia. And even with restrictive early action, for those of you who don't know, early decision is a binding agreement. Early action is an earlier application, but if you're accepted, you don't have to attend. Even in those cases, application numbers rose between 38 and 57% respectively. Finally, as I mentioned, like testing, the lack of the testing requirement is not a cause of celebration, in that as much as tests were optional, still when we broke down the numbers of admitted students who submitted testing, they were still in the greater majority. University of Pennsylvania, 75% of students admitted in the early round submitted standardized testing. And Georgetown in the early action pool, close to 7% of applicants who did not submit standardized test scores were admitted. I think especially, the test optional kind of piece really was reserved for students who were in a geographic location where it was not possible to, and like where there were circumstantial barriers to actually taking a test. Colleges do know your area, and they do know that testing was readily available to most students. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, Angelica. So I'm going to pick it up from here. And one of the first things I wanted to talk about was demonstrated interest. This to me is probably the biggest silver lining of COVID. I can't believe I'm saying there are some positive things that came out of this, but definitely this was the case. So demonstrated interest, just like the name would suggest, is the way in which students tell colleges that they're interested in those colleges. And what I found with COVID is that we've seen an increase, and actually, I'm not going to say increase, a creation of virtual info sessions, tours, webinars, things like that. And these events are often hosted by the admissions reps. It's not, it'll say if it's a student panel or something like that. So it's a really, and I mean it like literally, it's a great way to get FaceTime with future admissions reps. And it's great just geographically, students on the East Coast who weren't able to visit California or the Midwest. This is a wonderful opportunity. Literally, I tell my students to Google it, Google virtual info session, name of college, and it'll pop right up. So it's probably the most convenient way to show a college that you're interested in with it. And it's something that you can do without leaving the house. There's lots of other ways too to demonstrate your interest. I say this to all my students and they laugh, let them data mine you, right? If you go on to sign up for a webinar or there's like an information request form, fill it out. The most that's going to happen is you will get a substantial increase in your emails. And, I've been a teacher in schools long enough to know that not all of my students check their emails. So what I would highly, highly suggest is that when you do start this process, please do take 10 minutes a day to go through your emails. And actually the following point is, going through colleges' newsletters and opening up emails from them, because once you begin the process of telling a college that you're interested in it, they're going to send you ways that you can interact with them. And I mean this quite literally, some schools tally the number of times you interacted with the college. American University, right in DC, is a great example. So if they have two students who look similar on paper that they're evaluating, the student who had more interaction with them is going to get the leg up. So I cannot emphasize how important this is to begin interacting with colleges early and often. And honestly, I even recommend this to 9th and 10th graders just to kind of get a sense of what the college landscape can look like, because it is kind of overwhelming when you're in 11th and 12th grade to have to compare so many colleges against each other. A couple other ways you can interact: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They'll put polls out on there. They'll invite people to comment. So believe it or not, that's super important. When I was working in admissions, we did have what we called, we had our social media person who was tracking student interaction with it. They also tracked poor interactions, which I thought was very, very interesting at the time. Then there's more traditional ways that you can interact with colleges. And this is for 9th through 12th graders, across the gamut here. NACAC, which is, I'm a member of it, the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. They actually hold a regional fair right in Montgomery County. I would highly recommend you attend this fair, and really at any age. And it's great now. They give you a barcode. You literally, the barcode has your information on it, and all you have to do is scan it for each college. And then that college knows that you have interest in them. And then they'll follow up with the email and newsletter process like I was talking about before. You can also do on-campus visits. And again, I understand with COVID, some people might not be comfortable with that. So if you're not comfortable, totally fine. Utilize the virtual info session. But, if you can get out to some colleges near you and you have the ability to do so on spring break, which I know is coming up, I would start that process now. And then the last piece is follow-up. Okay, so whenever you interact with a college, you want to follow up, but we want to do so in two ways, right? We want to make sure that when we do it, it's formal, right? Like, so when I was working at admissions, sometimes students would send me super informal emails. And I'm going to say, like, you never know who you're interacting with on the other end. I didn't like that. And that didn't make me have a great impression of the students it wasn't like a hello, Krista, or hi, how are you, before they went into a question. So the way you interact is super important, but also interacting post tour and visit is important. So sending a thank you email, following up with sincere questions, right? The last thing admissions counselors want is for a student to ask a question that they answered in the presentation, right? So following up with a question that shows that you've done some research. I'm interested in these 3 different majors. Do you think I should apply undecided, or do you think I should pick a major? That's a great question, because that's not something that they're going to answer for you on the website. So interacting with colleges is key, but the quality of that interaction is also like a major takeaway. This also can help with writing your supplements, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So first thing, I'm going to backtrack a tiny bit, and I want to talk to my underclassmen in the room. So this can be a daunting subject for students who are in 8th through 10th grade, because I get it, 13, 14-year-olds thinking about what they're going to do in 4 years and then maybe for the rest of their life. Colleges could say, what major do you want? How are you supposed to know at that age? And we get it. So there's lots of ways, though, to begin prepping yourself for college applications now without it being an anxiety-inducing event, right? So the first thing that we want to think about is long-term goals, right? Some students actually know that they want to apply to top 20 and 30 schools. And to be frank, there's a lot you can do starting in 8th grade to put yourself on that trajectory, right? As Angelica was saying, making sure that you're getting involved in school in things that you're truly passionate about, but also exploring at the same time, right? 8th, 9th, 10th grade, that's a great time to be like, I like this subject, but I might also like this other subject. Use a summer program to go explore that. Totally fine. But let's say you're a STEM student and you're really into band. Stay in band. Get a leadership position. Volunteer to help at things related to music. I know one of my students, she gathered her band together and made YouTube videos to help senior citizens in nursing homes like brighten their day. She recorded them. That's enterprising. And that's the kind of stuff that, we've been working together for some time now. And I was able to say, hey, can you come up with something that would be cool that shows your passion, right? This is the kind of stuff we can do in 8th and 10th grade with, very, very little stress added, right? It's just little things you can do now. Other things you can think about is beginning to align your classes with your long-term academic goals. So for example, when I was an admissions counselor, one of the things I did was I looked at every student in the context of their school. So, for your high school, you're being evaluated against what your high school's curriculum looks like and your peers. Really no one else. They're not looking at other high schools because, for example, the high school that I used to work at in Boston, we had 4 clubs. So it's not fair to look at how much our students are involved in when we had so few clubs to offer. So keep in mind, it's always scope, okay? Scope of what your school does and what you can do, okay? So for example, if you're a STEM interested student, it's really good to try to take the most challenging courses you can in math and science, but also appropriately challenging yourself in the humanities, right? Colleges are looking for you to walk that tightrope of challenging yourself, but also not exhausting yourself. So, and that's one of the things that we'll do, especially with our 8th through 10th grade students, is talk about those nitty gritty questions like, I don't really like English. Do I take AP Lit? Right? Those are the kinds of questions that we're here to answer for you. Another big piece that we talk about is the test prep timeline. Some students are natural test takers and some students need some time to learn how to take the test, which I know sounds a little bit ironic, but there are, the ACT is a speed test. The SAT is a reasoning test. There are certain ways to prepare yourself and acclimate yourself to the test before taking it. So that's certain things that you want to just start thinking about gently now. Okay. And then the other thing is how you use your time. Okay. Colleges are looking at your resume. And by resume, I don't mean like job experience. I mean, it's a, how do I put it? It's a breakdown of the way you use your time. So for example, there are some students who can't participate in any activities because they have significant family obligations. That's fine. On the other hand, there's lots of students who have a lot of free time on their hands, right? And what colleges want to see is that students are getting involved, like we were saying with earlier on with extracurricular activities, sports, music, things like that, volunteer work, and then what you do over the summer, right? It's okay to become, a camper at a summer camp and then a counselor in training and then a counselor. I worked at a summer camp for 18 years. Totally fine. Some students use it at like a pre-college program to help figure out if they like majors. All of these things are wonderful. It's just the colleges want to make sure that you're balancing your academics and your extracurriculars. It's great to be a straight A student, but if you don't participate, how will the college know that you're going to participate at their school? So you have to keep in mind that they're using your resume as like a forecast for the student you're going to be at their school. Okay. So now we're going to talk timeline for a second. And I'm going to talk about this in two ways in terms of how colleges run their admissions process, but also I'm going to be talking about this in terms of academic year, not calendar year. So this is more for my 12th graders who might be in the room or people who are preparing for this particular timeline. So as you might know, right, we really want to start gearing up for the final pieces of the college process really in September of senior year, because I don't know if the guidance counselors are in the room, but there's a lot of stuff that your guidance counselor needs to do to support you in getting into college. And it's sending the letters of rec that you asked for before, gathering those letters, sending transcripts. So we want to make sure that you're ahead of the timeline so that you can ask for all this information without inundating your guidance counselor at the last minute. So this process, the actual first applications will usually start around November 1st and through November 15th. These two deadlines are called early decision and early action. What Angelica was talking about before, early decision is a binding agreement. So what you're doing is you're telling the college, if you admit me, I will come. That is a huge deal for colleges. So again, having worked in a very competitive college, what I found is that, we didn't know if we were going to lose our students to Stanford, Caltech, Harvard, right? And so knowing that you're going to get a student is a huge advantage because you don't have to worry about, again, yield protection, the idea that the student is just applying, but trying to get into another school. So early decision really does offer a lot of benefits. However, it can also put you into a more competitive pool. So that's what we're here to do, is to help you understand the balance of early decision. Early action is similar, except it's not binding, but it's connected to demonstrated interest. So when you apply early action, you're telling a college, I really like you and I want to know whether or not I'm going to get in earlier than if I applied regular decision. So students who apply early decision and early action generally find out before the winter holidays, which is a major advantage. So you can kind of take a deep breath. And again, you can keep applying if you've applied early action. The next is regular decision. This is probably the one everybody knows, usually due January 1st through 10th. And most of these decisions come out around, actually today was a huge release day for a lot of colleges. Again, I'm going to keep referencing MIT. We proudly release decisions at 3:14 on Pi Day. It was a thing. And so you'll see a lot of admissions decisions coming out this week. And then finally, there's rolling admissions, which you can utilize in multiple ways. Rolling admissions kind of it can be like an early action where you can apply early and find out early. And all it means is that you find out relative to when you applied. Some colleges have rolling admissions all the way through May. The only problem is their spots could fill up. So rolling admissions is also something that you could utilize to your advantage. But again, it's something that we would want to work on each student specifically with. So for the upperclassmen in the room, right, what do we do to get you through this process? The most important piece, and I'm going to talk about this in the next couple of slides, is the college list, obviously, making sure that it's balanced. I'm going to get into that. I want to ask everybody in the room to think about this one. Does the college, or do your colleges fit you? So often my students are trying to fit into what the image of the college has. I want to be a Harvard student. I want to be this kind of student. But we want to think about the college fitting you, right? Like there's such a huge difference between Brown and Stanford, right? And I really find that a personality, there's so much room there for you to show the college that you kind of fit in with their vibe. And it really matters. I could say so many times, I'm like, oh yeah, this is an MIT kid, right? Or be like, oh, that kid's totally like that's a Stanford kid, right? Like it really does matter. So keep that in mind, right? We also want to make sure that you love the college and it's a great fit for you. As I talked about with demonstrated interest, you want to think ahead of time about your visiting. I highly recommend for everybody listening tonight that you utilize spring break either for virtual trips or on-campus trips. Just make sure you call or reserve ahead of time because colleges are no longer allowing walk-ins like they used to. Another thing to think about is the people in your life in a lot of different ways. So like we have leveraging contacts. This could be a variety of things. You might know an alum who went to the school. Maybe your contact is an admissions rep that you've talked to a couple times via info sessions. Maybe, for example, you're somebody applying into art or music and you have someone who can evaluate your portfolio, who knows a lot about that particular area. These are all great things to do. There's no shame in talking to people and asking for advice. And I'm also going to follow up is just thinking about your support network as well. I'll get into that in a little bit, but just use this. Don't be afraid to lean on people during the college process. It's very emotional. It's going to bring up things that you hadn't thought about before. So leaning on a support network is super important. And then finally, sort of like the nitty gritty pieces, right? We have to prepare supplemental essays, which I'm going to get into. We want to think about whether or not you're interviewing. And again, I'll reiterate this. Everybody can interview. We can help you. We can help you if you're afraid. There's lots of ways, like we know the common questions, things like that. So don't be afraid of interviewing, especially because it is such a great way for the college to get to know, again, who they're admitting. So important. And talking about strategy a little bit. So I glossed over this a little bit earlier and I want to get into it now. I think most people in the room probably know the terms safety, target, and reach, right? Safety would be schools where you're exceeding the standard of the average admitted applicant. A target school is where you're matching the, typical GPA and SAT, ACT of the average admitted applicant. And then reach schools are where you might not quite be at that level of the average admitted applicant. We recommend at least 2 of each. We saying ideally applying to 9 or more because as Angelica was saying before, with yield protection and increasingly saturated application pools, you're going to want to cast the net a little bit wider. And we're really finding that this is incredibly important as the cycles, like the post-COVID cycles, we're getting data from them as we go. And one thing this is a big one I tell my students every year is like your only competition is yourself. Please keep that in mind. Do not compare yourself with your peers. Everybody has different life situations. There, people that you've known for years could have things going on that you don't know about. It is so critical that you do not compare yourself with your peers. And remember, we want to make goals and strategies appropriate to you and to no one else. If so-and-so did something and they got in, you don't know what their background looks like. So don't feel like you have to emulate anybody else's process. This is very relative to you. And being honest with yourself, right? We want to take a very good look at your profile. It's okay to have, 3 or 4 reach schools, but when that list is more than half reach schools and there's a possibility, it's a reach that you might not get in, you could have a really difficult March and April if you get a lot of rejections, right? We don't want that. So being honest with your profile and making sure that the schools that you pick are academically and socially appropriate for you, so important. Okay. And the last bit, starting early and staying organized. Like I said, you're going to start getting bombarded with emails. There's going to be supplemental essays to write. There's different applications to fill out. This process can get stressful quickly. So if you start early and my students love it, but get the spreadsheets rolling or have a piece of paper, but something you've got to have an organizational plan in place, and it will alleviate a lot of stress, both for the student and for the people supporting that student. One sort of nitty-gritty piece I want to talk about is strategy for you specifically and for the college that you're applying to. So we're going to use Carnegie Mellon here as a sort of a case study. So if you look at the School of Computer Science, it's kind of on the bottom there, you'll notice that the acceptance rate is 7%, where we compare to, if you see DC, that's the School of Humanities at Carnegie Mellon University, they have a 22% acceptance rate. So it is incredibly important that you're also evaluating what or how difficult it is to get into a major at a specific school. This will probably not shock anybody in this room, but computer science is getting really popular. Health sciences are getting really popular. It's a very saturated field. So one of the techniques that we often utilize with our students is, A, doing the research. Let's figure out what the acceptance rate looks like, but also B, finding out if you can do you have to apply computer science? Are there other ways in? Can you apply through another major and transfer eventually if you want to? Things like that. So there's a lot of strategies in place. Don't lock yourself into one major at 5 different colleges. Remember, there also can be shades of gray. Economics looks entirely different at Wake Forest than it does at Rutgers. So doing the research early and often, so important. My favorite, the essay. Longtime English teacher, this is literally my favorite thing to do. When I worked in admissions, and now I've been a reader for admissions for other colleges as well, there are days where I've read like 150 to 200 essays in a day, sitting in a room locked on a tablet. And I mean this, with 5 minutes to look at an essay. That's it. And it's such a subjective process. I'll be like, this essay was awful, right? Swipe. So you have to keep in mind that the essay it's probably the most critical piece of the application, because we're trying to admit classes that work together. And if you don't know who the student is by the end of that essay, how can you admit them? And another thing that I saw more, maybe a couple, like 10 years ago, is students using the essay as a resume. That there's plenty of space on the college application to put your resume. It's a story, narratives. I had a student who wrote about making a creme brulee and I was crying. So it doesn't have to be the most tragic moment of your life or the most celebratory moment of your life. It's a snapshot. I had a student who wrote about giving up her crabbing boots to the next generation because she didn't want to be in the family business. I was sobbing. It's just because it was beautifully written and I understood who she was. So that's what I'm saying. Like, the essay it's not supposed to be, a resume or anything monumental, but it is just a beautiful snapshot of who you are. So keep that in mind. The other thing is there's going to be a lot of writing. And I do notice that my students get writer's fatigue pretty quickly into the process because there are so many different essays. So one of the things that we walk our students through is writing core essays, right? Essays that can be tweaked and recycled, because if you're saying that, why you or how you're a part of your community, that kind of essay doesn't really need to be tweaked for too many colleges, right? You're just talking about your community service experience. And that actually leads me into the next slide, which is the supplementals. If this is something that sounds familiar to you or not, what it is colleges are starting to increasingly ask for additional essays. And this has been a huge increase in the last few years. I'll use Wake Forest as an example. They have 9. And they can range from why Wake Forest to what's the name of your food truck and what are you serving? It's what it is the colleges were really struggling to get to know the students that they were admitting. So they've increased these essays, A, to make sure you're serious about the college and you've done your research, but also B, to learn a little bit more about you, just in case your personal statement falls a little flat. I'll give you an example here with Cornell. This is one of their essays. Students in arts and sciences embrace the opportunity to delve into multifaceted academic interests, embodying in 21st century terms, Ezra Cornell's person, any study founding vision. Tell us about the areas of study you are excited to explore and specifically why you wish to pursue them at our college. This is a twofold question, saying, all right, well, why do you want to study this? But also, why here? Why not somewhere else? And got to admit, this more frequently will cause anxiety among my students because they're like, I don't know, I want to study English, but why at Cornell? So this requires attending those info sessions, going on tours, and really getting to know your colleges. And keep in mind, they also can be random. You know, what's your favorite word and why? Where's Waldo? Smith is like, I think Smith College asked for your favorite song and why. So for me, if I had been given this opportunity, I would have loved it. But a lot of my students just kind of like hang their head because it's more stress when you've already written like 50 other essays. So keep it in mind that we want to start the process early, keep it genuine, and do our research. Okay, and we have 2 more slides left, so you're almost there. Angelica, I'm going to toss it over to you for this one, and then I'll come back to wrap us up.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Krista. Yeah, just I think one thing that we just want to iterate before kind of going into, final words and thoughts, regardless of whether, you come and work with us, we just hope that this has been really helpful, and just keeping in mind that, this is, again, a very individualized process, and the goal here, is to hopefully explore, your interests and really reflect on your identity and your story, and hopefully reflect on kind of what you're most looking forward to in your future college life. So those would be kind of my, parting words, is just taking this, I really encourage students to take this as an opportunity to kind of get acquainted with themselves and, hopefully kind of hone skills that are useful for even beyond the college process. And I'll pass it back to you, Krista.
Thank you. So like I said, our parting advice, right? It's going to sound obvious, maintaining a good GPA, but I just also want to speak to the students in the room who maybe don't have the perfect GPA right now. Keep in mind that colleges are looking for upward trajectory. So tomorrow's a new day, right? And if you don't have the grades that you wanted to have, a turnaround story is also a story, right? And some students have, they start out strong and struggle, or they start out and they're not really acclimated to high school. It doesn't ruin your chance of getting into a college. There's a reason they ask for your transcript, and a student who might have had a slip here or there and goes back up to that upward trajectory, that shows perseverance and determination. So it's never too late, and just start fresh tomorrow. Taking the SAT, ACT, we've already spoken about this at length. It really is critical to have an exam by the end of your junior year. Also because you can take tests again in the summer between junior and senior year, and September, October of senior year. But that's why we really want to have a score locked in so we kind of know where you sit. Building your resume, right? You could be a 9th grader in the room or a 12th grader. It's still time to make sure that you're staying involved early and often, and follow and explore your passions. Okay? And that shows a college is looking for well-rounded but focused students. Getting life experiences, like especially with the advent of virtual education, like try something different. Take an online course. MIT offers a high school, like a high school version of their course 6, which is it's a well-known course for computer science. You can learn how to code in Python online. These are all things that they're so accessible. Try it. And if it's something that you get a tangible outcome from, like maybe you coded an app or something like that, you can show that to a college. So, explore, challenge yourself, but also don't put a lot of pressure on yourself. Remember, exploring is really important, especially for teenagers. And last but not least, we're just going to keep saying it. If you're here tonight, you're already kind of starting the process, right? You're thinking about it. So I would really recommend just sitting down and having a talk, no matter what grade you're in, just trying to think about things that students like and colleges that they might be interested in. And if it's too early to talk about college, just talk about interests. What are students interested in? What can you explore? What can you get to know? And just by doing that, you're putting more forethought into it than a lot of the rest of the country, to be frank. So
Yeah.
that's it, right? So we are ready for your questions. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah, whether or not, you're planning, or whether or not you're actually in the getting started into the writing stage, we hope that this has been helpful, and that the takeaway is that, curiosity is something that's contagious. But we'd love to open up the floor for questions now. I think if you could write them in the chat, that would be
Yep.
really, really helpful. And like I said, we'll do our best. To answer questions. We might not be able to if they're really individualized, just again, because so much of our advice is on a student basis, but we hope to answer and clarify anything that we can.
So actually, we have a great question, Angelica. I'm going to throw this one to you. I think this is a really great question for everybody in the room. Is it okay to apply as undecided? Does it lower your chance of admission?
So this is actually, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions that I get with parents and students. If anything, it's actually helpful to apply as undecided, and can be if you're particularly drawn to fields that are really oversaturated. That being said, this does not change kind of the onus that's on a student to establish they have delved deeply into the interests that they have explored in high school. So, even if a student is applying undecided on a supplement that's, what we would call maybe like an academic interest essay, they would be going into maybe different fields. Let's say they're interested in, potentially political science and biology and psychology, and explore and discuss different ways in which they might explore different fields that might seem unrelated and try to synthesize them in a creative way. So applying undecided can be advantageous, and we often encourage students to do so. But just keeping that in mind, that's not, students still have to very much establish and advocate for the interests that they're excited to pursue, and the disciplines that they've already started honing expertise in.
And we got another great question, which I'm going to take this one here. What's your opinion on the early college dual enrollment that's being offered in a lot of parts of the country? That's a great question. And you're going to love this because this is going to be my party line. It's very much down to the individual. But what I will say is I would keep in mind the idea of dual enrollment early college in terms of credits, right? Well, a lot of the time, what I'll tell my students is, I very much want my students to do dual enrollment when they can, but more for experience than for the college credit, right? Because colleges, they will accept the credits a lot of the times that students do when they do dual enrollment, but more it's to show colleges that you're ready for college level work. So a lot of my students get wrapped up in the credits and like what will transfer over to the college. I say to them, assume nothing will transfer. It probably will, right? But if you assume nothing will transfer and you're just using it for the experience, again, you're showing colleges that you're ready for college level work. And another piece is so for example, my students who do STEM via dual enrollment, I'm like, please save those lab reports, save anything you've done, because sometimes colleges look for not a portfolio, but examples of college level work or examples of students' best work. So I love dual enrollment for having examples of college level work that students can use to demonstrate, especially to our prestigious colleges, that they are capable of the work that those colleges are doling out. So let's see. Getting a couple questions now. So Angelica, I'm going to throw this one over to you. So it says, if students are not accepted, will it hurt their chances to transfer in after they excel in core courses elsewhere?
Yeah, so as it relates to, I'm assuming that we're meeting kind of regular round of admissions for maybe not receiving an acceptance and transferring in later. To be honest, the transfer admissions experience is kind of completely different than the regular, from high school admissions. Transfer transfer numbers tend to be a lot more competitive. I have had students who have been rejected from a university and then, gone elsewhere and then reapplied. I think that's one way of establishing demonstrated interest, and it can be successful. But again, the transfer rates and policies just differ so significantly across different institutions. So it's a little hard to make kind of a sweeping statement about that.
We have another great question talking about college visits. So, and I'm going to sort of broaden this question because this is great. So what happens if you have a student who's got 15 schools on their list? Are you supposed to visit all those schools? What do you do when you visit the school? Great question. So that the reason why I recommend the virtual info sessions first is because you don't have to visit every school on the list. Absolutely not, especially if you don't have the time or the money, to be frank, right? Like to fly to Boston or something like that. So, let's use Boston as an example, right? That's trip. So, and you've got your student has interest in Boston, Maryland, California, schools like that. Go to the virtual info session first. See, really vet the school, make sure your students like it. And a big thing I'm going to say here, especially to the parents in the room, because it can be really hard, if a student has a list that's quite heavy on the reaches, right? Visiting a reach school that's truly a reach isn't always helpful either, right? Because a student can fall in love with a college that they might not get into. So what I would say is do the work first, right? Establish a list, see which ones are safety targets and reaches before you go on these visits. And temper your visits, right? So if you're going to go to Boston, I wouldn't just go to Harvard, MIT, Tufts, and Wellesley. I would put Northeastern in. I would put Wentworth Institute of Technology in. I would put in other schools that are a balance, also so that students can compare. I find that that's really, really helpful, like BU, Northeastern, fairly equal caliber schools, so different. And they're like a mile apart. So that's what I'm saying. So do research before you go on a tour. You don't have to go on a tour of all the schools. And then when you go on the tour, this is also a great question. Be the student who's up front, right? If there's a tour of 10 kids, being in back, you won't hear anything. You also want to engage the tour guide, get their name, write the thank you email. I loved my tour by Sarah. That was great, right? So that level of interaction is so critical because especially I've been a tour guide and some of them are students. It's horrible when no one's interacting with them on the tour. It's harmful to them. They feel like they've done a bad job. So get right up there with that tour guide, ask questions. And if you go to an info session, like a real info session at the college campus, have some genuine questions prepared. Remember, I'm interested in bio and music. What do you tell people who are interested in diverse majors? Do we apply undeclared? Or do we choose a major? That's a great question because you're helping everyone else in the room. So when you go on a tour, make sure that you're really putting effort into it and that it's a school that is tenable for your student, right? We don't want them falling in love with an entire list worth of reaches, and that could really harm them, especially if, a wonderful school, let's say BU is like a second choice for them, right? It's such a great school. We don't want them thinking it's a lesser school because they've only seen a certain caliber. So thinking about it like that. Let's see. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. So Angelica, I'm going to throw this one over to you. How would you mitigate lack of longevity for a junior resume? Let's say there's not a lot of extracurriculars there.
Yeah. I think one thing to keep in mind for, our current juniors, I think that there is a level of understanding extended given the pandemic. Like colleges know that it's been challenging to participate in extracurriculars given, remote circumstances. In terms of mitigating that, I think trying to really in the activities that a junior is in, really trying to make sure that they're contributing meaningfully to those and achieving leadership positions. That would be my recommendation. And then additionally, if it's, let's say it's something, that's like a student, I'm just giving you an example, that's like a student club or something like that, that's in a specific field or area. Really thinking about if you're not able to, you've limited runway in terms of involvement with that specific club, maybe there's a summer activity that's in the same field that shows continued and extended interest in one area that is particularly relevant to the narrative of your application. So those would be kind of my primary recommendations for that lack of longevity, which is something that, a lot of students are facing and that we're aware of.
We'll add, like there's something called the additional information section of the Common App. If that lack of longevity is due to something like COVID, or it could be a family thing, could be a variety of things, contextualizing why a student does or does not participate is actually also incredibly important. So any other questions? Okay, this is a great question. These are really great questions tonight. Thank you. Would you say it's more important to have good academic scores versus extracurriculars? That's a great question. So, and guess what? I'm going to say it's relative. But what I'll say, right, is we want to keep an eye on balance. Okay. So if I had a student with wonderful GPA and fabulous test scores and no extracurriculars, I'd be like, I don't know if this student's going to be a joiner at this school. Colleges want students who are willing to engage with the community. So a lack of extracurriculars and a good GPA is actually kind of more of a turnoff in the admissions field. Students who don't test well, but have a good GPA, that's where we want to individually talk about test optional, right? Like there's a certain point where you can only put a student through so much prep, right? So like that's a very different conversation. You also get the interesting dichotomy of students who have excellent test scores and lower GPAs. That's something that's a really big red flag for colleges. But more often than not, I see students with excellent GPAs and low test scores, but great resumes. That's where we'll have a pretty in-depth conversation about where they submit their scores and where they don't, because like I said, some students just aren't test takers. But bottom line, high GPA, high test score, no extracurriculars, definite red flag. So making sure that there's some sort of involvement or a reason that the student isn't involved, like considerable family obligations. So it's all about context. That's all for our questions. We're here. I'm saying this is the last question I have in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions for us? Okay, let's see. So Angelica, I'm going to throw this one over to you. Are self-directed solo activities viewed as positively as those that involve more community-oriented activities?
That's a great question. I think this is one that really depends on the type of activity. I know that might not be incredibly helpful, but I think that when students take initiative and go beyond kind of structures that are readily available to them and that are available to their peers, maybe that's starting a company, or maybe that is engaging in music at a very intense level, or doing independent research. Those are looked upon, like, I think very favorably by admissions, because it shows a student who is willing to take initiative, who is a creative problem solver, and who is kind of pushing the boundaries of what is readily available to them. So I think that that's really, really positive. The more that a student can leverage that kind of activity into something that benefits other people, I think that that is important. I mean, colleges want students who are really cognizant about the way that, what the independent work that they're doing is impacting those around them, people who are mission driven, who really have, a social kind of consciousness and awareness. I know Krista had mentioned a student who I think had recorded some of her music and sent them to different community. That would be an example of making kind of small efforts to take independent work and benefit other people. So, as much as we encourage students to have self-directive solo activities because it shows initiative, but as much as a student can, kind of creatively leverage that to benefit others, that would be something that I'd really encourage students to put quite a bit of thought into.
Thank you. Here's a great question. For art students, what are colleges looking for in a portfolio? So I'm going to expand this one a little bit because there's a lot of different portfolios out there. So there's art portfolio, music portfolio, makers portfolio. So again, as a MIT alum here, or well, admissions alum, I will say like a tangible evidence that students, like we actually evaluated 2 students who built a boat at one point, like it came down to that. So like, that's what I'm saying. So portfolios are really important. So one of the things I will say is like, I don't know anything about art, but I've worked with enough students who have done art portfolios and a variety of these portfolios to know that the biggest recommendation I can tell you is to go to portfolio days at the college. Because I actually last year I had a student going between FIT, Pratt, PAFA, which is a performing arts school in Philadelphia, and the New School in New York City. And I had her go to a portfolio day for each of those colleges, and they all gave her different feedback on the same portfolio for the same major. I was floored. So what I would say is each college, despite the fact that they could have people applying to the same major, is going to want something different. Like the New School, for example, wanted her to draw something like a lamp, right? While FIT could care less and they just wanted fashion. So make sure you're going. They have what's called a National Portfolio Day. It's actually online now. It's really awesome. So I recommend going to the National Portfolio Day and individual portfolio days for all the college and sign up like ASAP. If you're a junior right now, see when the spring and fall portfolio days are, because they fill up like lightning. The minute that goes up, students take the slots. So absolutely, because like I said, most guidance counselors would probably say the same thing. It's such an esoteric thing for us to comment on. So you need a professional's opinion. Let's see here. So, this is interesting. So, so if you're utilizing like a summer, like, so let's say you're going on vacation over the summer, is there anything that students can do or like use, as toward a portfolio, things like that? So yeah, totally. Like if you're going to go on a summer vacation, and I know some families go away for quite some time, photography, really great fun thing to experiment with if you're on a vacation. Maybe even like if you're going away, right? Like, so let's say you're going to France or to Italy, if students could do like a mini language course, that's something that's really great, like engaging with locals. Maybe there's even like a small activity that a student could participate in while they're there. Like I've actually had students who've been away with their family for the whole summer do like Habitat for Humanity. So like there are definitely ways to engage, even if your family has like long traditions of like I'm a Jersey girl, like going to the shore, right? There's still ways that you can engage and build a portfolio via photography or a variety of other things. So that's a great question.
Yeah, and just to kind of build off of that too, for like, for like the writing process, one thing that we do encourage students, like I think trying to contain the scope of these essays, I think is often very helpful. I know that Krista was saying earlier about, story being really important. Sometimes starting with kind of an artifact or an image or an object can be a really useful place to start. I don't know, I was just thinking a couple years back, I had a student who had gone to Florence, and I'm trying to remember exactly, but she had written her personal statement. I think there were some like sculptures by like Michelangelo that were in like the Medici catacombs or something, but she had this understanding, like her background was actually in kind of like biology and had done a lot of like research on anatomy, and wrote a really fascinating essay that I felt like no one else could have really written on these sculptures. So like really thinking of when we're writing essays, we don't want them to be a portrait of a place. We want them to be a portrait of the student. So if there are, if there's media or anything that the student finds like really inspiring that they can frame through their own unique lens, that's just something to kind of keep an eye out, especially kind of as a 10th grader going into junior year and kind of thinking about what you might enjoy, what your student might enjoy writing about.
We have a few more minutes left. Are there any other questions that we can ask or answer? I'm sorry. Okay, let's see. Is participating in clubs or any school directed activity besides the curriculum required for college required for low acceptance rate colleges or in general? What if activities are external to school? That's a great question as well. So nothing is required. So I'm going to backtrack that for a second. So yes, so colleges have base requirements. So like Harvard, for example, requires 4 years of a language where most US high schools don't, right? So yes, there are some specific criteria for each college. There isn't, so I would encourage you to look at the criteria, the curriculum criteria. However, most high schools in general, their curriculum is built to satisfy these curriculum requirements for college. The only time where we'll get some deviation is in length of a language. And I'll give you MIT, for example. It's going to want students to take 4 years of math and science, where I worked in New York and Massachusetts. We only required 3 years of math and science, right? So some colleges are going to want you to meet higher standards than what a high school will require for graduation. So that's a great example. And then Angelica, I'm going to throw the second part to you. What if a student's activities are all external to the school? What does that say about an applicant?
This can kind of, again, I think balance is really, really important. On the one hand, we encourage students to seek out opportunities that are kind of self-initiated or that impact kind of greater concentric communities that maybe go to a local, regional, even potentially national scale. But I would be concerned if a student had no activities that were related to the school, because kind of, again, as Krista was saying, colleges, they want students who are actively engaged on campus and who are going to get to campus and be engaged members there. So I think really trying to find that balance is important.
We have another really great question. This one's about sports. So for students who are, highly involved in a sport, but aren't applying to a D1 school, right? So D1 schools that are colleges that actively recruit students and provide a financial benefit like a scholarship for that student to attend the college. And then there's D2 and D3 schools. So D3, it's competitive, but they're not offering scholarships. They're not actively recruiting, and D2 actually falls smack in the middle there. But so what do? If your student has been highly involved in a sport for all of high school, but doesn't want to apply to a D1 school, and all of a sudden their resume looks like the sport and just classes, right? I totally get it. So what I would say is, first of all, take a deep breath there, right? Because again, longevity and passion. Colleges get it. They know that sports are time consuming. So what I would say is one of two things, right? So some students are involved in like winter and spring track, right? And that's the entirety of their application. So for students who are already kind of like, let's say you're a senior, that's still showing longevity and passion. If you're an 11th grader and lower, what I would suggest is, especially on the off season for schools or for your sport, make sure that you are still like, I would try to get into like 1 or 2 clubs just to show, that you're still involved in the rest of the activities in your school. I was in marching and concert band in high school. I get it. I mean, it was 3 practices after school plus the weekends. There wasn't a lot of room to do other things, but that's where, joining National Honor Society, things like that some of them are kind of baked into the school day. It makes life a little bit easier. I would recommend, if you haven't already, trying to find a little bit of balance there. Angelica, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it can be really tricky territory to navigate. Again, I don't know, I just was thinking of a student that I was working with this fall, actually, and he was kind of in that position and had been a competitive swimmer, and that had been kind of the primary activity that he had been involved in. One thing that I found very interesting about the way that he talked about swimming was he was interested in physics. And I don't know a lot about physics myself, but he broke down kind of that actually swimming had really fed his academic interest because it was related to how bodies move through space and torque, and that he had kind of connected those. So like, is there a way that just beyond the application of the sport, that something about the involvement relates to like a greater part of the application narrative? I've had students connect sports involvement to like cultural anthropology or like political science, like groupthink. Like there's so many ways to get creative, and kind of as with anything, how can you uniquely contextualize the interest, and how can you write about it in a way that even if there are other students who have engaged in the same activity, that they couldn't.
Yeah. And I realized I missed a part of that question. Just if a student is interested in pursuing their sport, D2 or D3, just make that obvious to the college and they will ask about it. Like, if you're someone who's been doing soccer your entire life, what I'll sometimes get is a student who's done this entire life and they're like, I don't want to touch this in college, right? And then the colleges are like, but don't you want to play on our team? And they want you, right? So make sure you do leverage that, if that's something that students are still interested in participating in, even participating in an intramural fashion in college, right? Because you're still telling the college that you're going to be participating in this way, shape, or form. So definitely for D2 and D3, make it obvious if you want to, that you want to be a part of that sport, and they will consider that in admissions, because you never know, like they could have a ton of physics majors applying that year, right? But they need someone on the swim team. That matters. It really does. So making sure that they're aware of all of those parts is it's such a huge part of the process, because remember, colleges are also trying to fill in blanks in their class, and yeah, having an ice skater who's also a biology major can help. Okay, let me see. Another great question. Let's see. I'm going to skip to the recommendation part of this. Give me one moment. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. So early college enrollment, right? How are early college students viewed, and what recommendations are unique to their situation to boost the strength of their college application? So this is interesting, right? When you have an early college student, like Angelica, I'm gonna throw this one to you. Just like, so if they are in early college, like who are they getting recommendations from? Should they be getting it from their professors, right? Or if they're still in high school? And then so that's one end of it. That's dual enrollment. And then there's early college students, right, who just to be clear, right, early college students are students who apply in junior year, and they'll actually complete their senior year in high school. So I don't know which one of those you want to grab, Angelica, and then I'll happily take the other one.
Yeah, I think that the advice is fairly similar in terms of the most recent academic year. And I think having recommenders that, one of them would probably speak to the students' perspective kind of, area of specialization or interest, and then another, professor or teacher who is perhaps teaches something that's farther on another end of the academic spectrum. So I wouldn't say that diverges kind of completely. I know that it might be a little bit more of a complicated process to navigate. Kind of when it comes to early college enrollment, it is tricky because these situations are so individualized. So it's a little bit hard to make kind of like a sweeping generalization with that. I think, again, one thing we've been iterating throughout the night has been context. What is the motivation? What was the motivation for the students? Early college enrollment. I think giving, students have very different motivators. So giving that type of context and making sure there's a full picture is really important.
Yeah, and one of the things I tell my early college students, right, not many colleges do early college, like in the grand scheme of things. So I would really be in a very consistent communication with those college admissions folks, because early college is it's different, right? Like, because, and that's the opposite end of the spectrum to dual enrollment, right? Where you have students already like who are doing college work in high school, whereas this way with early college, you have students who are high school students, like actually finishing their high school career at a college. So like what Angelica was saying, obviously, definitely being in contact with the teachers who know them best, but really keeping that line of communication open with the admissions office, because they'll give you a little bit more TLC. I found this over the years just because they are working with younger students. So I've found that early college admissions representatives are kind of more interactive. So start those conversations now for sure. Let's see. That's interesting. Our recommendations from college professors weighed more heavily. No, so I'll say that one's probably like it's more just the quality of the recommendation, right? And their knowledge of the student's background. So, and I've been through this with students before where, college professors are busy and sometimes the recommendation actually like can be a little bit more terse from busier professors, and like my students will want them because they're professors as opposed to high school teachers. But I always tell them, I'm like, if you have a rapport with that teacher and you've done well in that class, then you should go for it. It's the same across the spectrum because you don't want to be asking a busy professor who's going to write a shorter recommendation. So if you know that professor and they're like, absolutely, I'll write that recommendation for you, that's a good sign. But if they're like, okay, shoot me an email, you might want to just be careful with that, because I have seen quite very, very short recommendation letters from professors before. So, and I'm not saying that's across the board. It's just, it really depends on where you're doing dual enrollment and who you're working with and how closely you work with them. Other questions we can answer. I think we have like 2 more minutes.
Yeah,
But we can get 1 or 2 in there. Angelica, I'm going to throw this one to you. Is taking summer college classes considered important to GPA as regular term classes?
I would say that it can, like supplement in a really positive way and show that a student is taking on a challenge and developing kind of specialization. If there is a situation that needs to be explained in terms of maybe a student not doing as well in a certain area and wanting to kind of exemplify an upward trajectory, great. All of that is positive, but I don't think that summer college classes kind of ever trump just the regular curriculum. It's, super important that just the regular kind of core classes that there's that the GPA in that is strong, and that's what colleges are going to consider kind of most heavily.
We got one more. Okay, let me see what we've got here. Okay, that's a great question. So great. So Angelica and I are college consultants, right? And we do the majority of the process with students, but there are specific consultants who work for sports or for arts. Yes, right. And what we offer specifically at Potomac, and this might differ, but yes, like, so for example, I know that there are people who do like specifically work with students who have music portfolios, specifically work with students who are athletes. What I would say is you don't necessarily need to go with an outside person, but if you do have a student who's a D1 athlete, you do need to make sure that you're in conversation with their coaches for sure, to make sure that they are being recruited. And if that's something that's not happening, then you might want to consult an outside service. But generally, I would say go within house first, start with your high school, talk to the coaches and see when these schools are coming to recruit, because generally it's less of a portfolio and much more of like observing them in a game and then actually speaking to them. So like making sure that students are confident to speak about their abilities, both on the field and academically. That's a really big one, because sometimes coaches will come and they'll want to talk to the kids, and that's actually the make it or break it scenario, and the students aren't prepared for that conversation. So I'd say whether or not you hired someone outside or not, just make sure the student is prepared to speak about themselves, kind of like an interview, but a little bit more informal. Yep. Okay, I can do one more if anybody's got one more. Otherwise, that'll be it. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it. Well, we're happy to answer, any questions via email, again, if you're interested, or I should say like larger general questions. And if you're interested in working with us, we're happy to work with you. But otherwise, we hope that you found this evening informative and that it was nothing but informative and not anxiety inducing in the least. Just keep remember, if you're already listening tonight, you're ahead of the game. You got this.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their evening.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
Krista
much.
and Angelica, for that excellent presentation. It was so informative, and I know I learned a lot. So thank you so much. And for those that joined us tonight, thank you for joining. We'll see you April 19th. It's the first day back to school after spring break. We have another great presentation for you. So hope everybody has a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you so
night,
much.
everyone.